Okay, great. Good evening. The Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, April 14th, 2021 is now called to order. This meeting is being conducted using teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the State of California Executive Order N2920 dated March 17, 2020 regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. The live stream of the meeting may be viewed on Comcast Channel 15 and or online as noted on the agenda. In accordance with the order, the public may only view the meeting on television or online and not in the council chambers. We are conducting tonight's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. All planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations. All voting will be conducted by roll call vote. Director Paulson, would you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair Janoff. Commissioner Tabana?
Here.
Commissioner Hanson? I think Commissioner Hanson may be having some challenges with her internet connection, but she is present. Commissioner Suzuki?
Here.
Commissioner Thomas?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Present.
Vice Chair Birch?
Here.
And Chair Janoff.
Here. As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting on behalf of the Town Council and residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of the Planning Commission. That participation can occur through written comments about agenda items submitted to staff prior to a meeting, which are always helpful and welcome. During our meeting, there are two opportunities for the members of the public to participate. During the verbal communication period, an individual may speak on any topic not on the agenda. And during the hearing on a specific agenda item, any member of the public may speak about that item that is on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission tonight during the verbal communication period or during the consideration of an agenda item, you must join the Zoom webinar via the link and password provided on page 2 of the staff report. And when I announce the item for which you wish to speak, please click the raise hand feature in Zoom. And if you're participating by phone, press *9 on your telephone keypad. When called to speak, please state your name and address for the record. Alternatively, you may choose to speak anonymously. It is requested that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. And at this time, before we begin our formal agenda this evening, we would like to take time to express our sorrow at the passing of former Planning Commissioner Charles Erickson. We extend our heartfelt condolences to his loved ones. Vice Chair Birch and Commissioner Hanson would each like to offer further tributes. Vice Chair Birch.
Thank you. Before we start, I did want to say that Commissioner Hanson is actually having some trouble logging into Zoom. Joel, I think she was trying to reach you, but just wanted to let you guys know that. So thank you. Thank you for letting me take a couple moments to speak about Charles. Charles passed away last week after a bout with cancer. And I think so many of us probably know Charles through a lot of different ways. He was very, very active in the town, taught at Santa Clara. He was definitely an active and very engaging person. I'm just going to briefly speak, obviously, about the Planning Commission and a little bit about what I think Charles meant to not only myself, but other new planning commissioners. Charles joined the Planning Commission, I confirmed with Joel today, 2009, and served through 2016. And during that time, we can definitely say that Charles saw many, probably some of our more controversial applications that came through the town. And one of the things that I always admired was how eloquently he could speak his way through some of those difficult topics taking the time, I felt, to always bring us back to what our role was as the planning commissioners, while remembering that we are all residents of the town of Los Gatos, and we all care deeply about the town and its residents. Charles always, and I do mean always, took the time to answer all of my questions. He took an active interest in making sure that I was able to learn my way around all the nuances of the planning commission, what our role was, how we interact with the public and with each other. There was never a time that he did not have time for a cup of coffee and a conversation. And if it wasn't around the planning commission, it was around my daughters or around his family. He had very many good stories. And he just always took the time to let me know that he cared. One of the ways that he oftentimes showed that he cared is he knew that there were plenty of meetings where I think I came like running in from traffic from work and didn't eat. And I think it became his mission to remind me to please eat some food. And if it wasn't that food was available, he was really, really good at finding me the M&Ms, which are my favorites. And then just always, again, remembering to ask all of us about children or vacation or just something along the lines that remind us that we're not just here to do a job, that we are volunteers here, most of us, and we're here because we care, and we become a team that works together and supports each other and takes the time to ask questions and to just know about each other. I walked away from that time with him, definitely, I think, just an all around, I hope, better person that did sometimes remember to not just focus on the task in front of us that day, but to take a few minutes and connect with each other as people, and to remind myself that, it's okay to ask questions and to not know, and to take a few minutes, maybe to explain those things to other people. So I won't take any more time than that, other than to just say that the world lost somebody very, very special. And I think we're all a little bit better from knowing him, and our hearts go out to his family, and our prayers go to them during this time. And I will, I think, let Commissioner Hanson now take the torch.
Oh gosh, it'll be hard to follow that, but thank you so much, Vice Chair Birch. I had the unique experience of sitting next to Charles as a brand new commissioner in 2015. And it was such a great experience for me, because when you first get to your first meeting, it's sort of a little bit overwhelming and all the things that are going on. And he was always a real calming factor. And as Vice Chair Birch said, he took an interest in you personally. And I don't know that I have talked to a lot of people about this, but my one of my children was very, very, very ill and was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And it happened right around the time of my second planning commission meeting. And I was just beside myself, because we didn't know when he would ever get out of the hospital. And it was pretty grave situation. And, and then Charles was always asking me, how are you doing? And, are you taking care of yourself? And all this kind of stuff. And so he was so, he and also our former chair, Tom O'Donnell, were both the kind of person where they would listen to a hearing and they would hear all the evidence. And then in one sentence, they could just say, this is what this means. And Charles Erickson was also very, very passionate about the way that things should be and how we did things as a planning commission, and doing the right thing for the community. So I feel honored to have known him. And I, like I said, he was very encouraging to me. And I remember he told me after my second or third meeting, he goes, my wife's really impressed with you and all this. And, we enjoy having you on the commission. So I agree with Vice Chair Birch. It's a big loss for us. And I'm sure it must have been such a big shock for his family. And the world will be less of a great place without him. Thank you.
Thank you for those really heartfelt and beautiful comments. Director Paulson, I understand there are members of the public who would also like to speak.
That's correct. I'm going to allow former Commissioner and Chair Tom O'Donnell to speak. So Tom, if you unmute yourself, then
I just did. Can you hear me?
we can.
All right. Well, you've heard me a lot. I just want to say that Charlie and I served together for around 7 years, and I got to know Charlie and his wife Susie very well during that time and subsequent to that time. Charlie was a rare man, and of all the commissioners I dealt with, it was a long time, 16 years. He was among the best, and he was among the best of the best. And part of the reason for that was he had that rare gift of wisdom. A lot of people, thank God, are smart, but a fewer number of people are wise. And Charlie was one of those people that was wise. So I will say very shortly that it was a pleasure to have known him, to serve with him. I was getting ready for him to celebrate his 75th birthday shortly ago, and at the same time discovered that he was dying. I'm almost in tears now. Sorry. When I think about it, I will just conclude by saying Charlie did a lot of good in his life, and I will miss him. I'm sure we will all miss him. I apologize for my emotions. That's it.
Thank you so much for those comments, and we love you and we miss you too for all the same reasons. Dr. Paulson, are there any other members of the public who wish to speak?
I don't see any other hands raised. If anyone else would like to speak regarding Mr. Erickson, please use the raise hand feature. I don't see any other hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you.
Sorry, as I said, that one hand did raise, so I'm going to allow them to talk.
Hello, commissioners. This is Amy and Susie, Charlie's family. And we wanted to let you know that we were here listening and watching, and just wanted to offer our deep appreciation for this tribute that you have given my dad and my mother's husband, and let you know that he took such pleasure in serving the community in this way. And he felt like it was a great honor to be able to do that. And he spoke so highly of each of you and everyone that works for the city of Los Gatos. And he lived a life of service, and he appreciated others that live a life of service. And that is all of you. And communities don't happen without people like you and my dad, who step up and make a difference. And so thank you for doing that and continuing to do that, and for stewarding the city that I was raised in, even though I don't live there now. It's a great place, and it's only a great place because of people like you who continue to serve. And so thank you for doing that. He loved doing that as well.
Thank you so much, Amy, for your comments. We truly appreciate that.
So Chair, let's just give it another second. There was a hand raised, but it went down. So let me see if anyone else would like to speak on this topic regarding Mr. Erickson. I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, thank you to everyone for this tribute. I did not know Charles as well as most of you. In fact, I was the one who filled his shoes when he left the Planning Commission. And all I can say is they were huge shoes to fill. And I'm still learning every day how best to do that. So thank you so much. Okay. After a brief pause. Vice Chair, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys, for letting us do that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a must. We've now come to the verbal communications portion of our meeting. Members of the public are invited to address the commission on any issue not on the agenda. Director Paulson, do we have any members of this public wishing to speak at this time?
I don't see any hands raised, Chair. If anyone would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda, please use the raise hand feature. I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the consent calendar. And we have 2 items to be acted upon with a single motion this evening. The first is the approval of minutes from our March 24th, 2021 meeting. And the second is a request for continuing the approval for demolition of an existing single-family residence, construction of a new single-family residence, and site improvements requiring a grading permit on property zoned R18 located at 16666 Topping Way, APN 532-09018. Architecture and site application S19044, property owner and applicant Arthur Lynn, project planner Sean Mullen. This is requesting a continuance because the property has been sold since our last meeting, and the continuance is for the new owner to decide whether to pursue the application or not. Does any commission member or member of the public wish to pull the item or either item from the consent calendar? I don't see any hands raised. Seeing none, may I have a motion for approval of the consent calendar? Commissioner Hanson.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Barnett, thank you for that. Any comments or changes before I call the question? I don't see any. Commissioner Hanson, your hand is raised, but I suspect that was for your motion.
No,
It was.
actually. Oh, sorry.
Now we'll take the roll call vote at this time. Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Tabana,
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Suzuki,
Yes.
Vice Chair Birch,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. The motion passes unanimously. We now move on to public hearings, agenda item number 3. This item is requesting approval for demolition of an existing detached garage and construction of a new single-family residence on property zoned R18 located at 14300 Laura Drive, APN 409-15028, architecture and site application S20019, property owner Amrita Chop, and applicant Krislani Munia. Project planner is Sally Zarnaretz. May I see a show of hands from commissioners who have visited the site? Thank you. I understand Ms. Zarnowitz will be giving the report tonight from staff.
Yes, thank you. This application was before you in February, and it was continued to tonight with direction to the applicant to address the height of the structure and privacy concerns raised by the neighbors, among other things. And the applicant has worked with the neighbors and revised the project. The overall height has been reduced by over 3 feet. The second floor has been reoriented, steps back on the left side, and the applicant has agreed to several conditions in the revised conditions of approval to address bathroom windows, tree screening, and an extension on the rear fence. This project also went to the town's consulting architect, who noted that the changes have been thoughtfully implemented and who had no recommendations for additional changes. So should the Planning Commission determine that the revised project meets the direction provided at the last meeting, they may approve the architecture and site application with revised conditions contained in Exhibit 17 and the revised development plans in Exhibit 18. This concludes staff report, but we are here to answer any questions.
Thank you for that report. Do any commissioners have questions for Ms. Zarnowitz or staff at this time? I don't see any hands raised.
Chair, I think Ms. Hanson's, Commissioner Hanson's
Sorry.
hand is raised.
Yes, I had a question. We had a comment come in through the desk item, and the some of the comment was oriented around parking, in particular parking for the ADU, and also the what would ensure that they continue to keep it as an ADU versus trying to subdivide and whatnot. So I was wondering if staff could, number one, address the issue about parking. It was my understanding that we have limited authority to enforce parking for ADUs, given the drive to put new housing, but I was hoping staff could comment on that.
Yeah, I can start if the director has something to add, but essentially this is existing square footage, the conversion of existing square footage to an ADU, and the state and our ordinance state that no parking is required when there is conversion of existing square footage. So it wouldn't be required. The applicant can speak to the amount of parking that is on the site, even if it's not required. And I don't know if you had further question about subdivision, or it was primarily parking.
I didn't have a question per se about subdivision, but I thought I saw in the conditions of approval, if this is approved, that they were required to apply for it to be an ADU. Is that correct?
It's not exactly required, but it's allowed to be converted to an ADU once they have the entitlement for the new house. So once they do have that entitlement, this square footage will be converted.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? I don't see any. So at this time, we will open the public hearing and give the applicant up to 5 minutes to address the commission. Who will be speaking for the applicant?
Hi, this is the owner, Amrito.
Go ahead.
I have a presentation if you can bring it up, please. Thank you. So this house is my dream and has been carefully designed to keep my family's needs in mind. Intended to be a multi-generational household, my aged parents will be living with me, primarily to provide them with the care they need and the love and affection that only immediate family can provide in their advanced years. I also have a teen who needs his space, and this house has been designed to satisfy all our needs. With this in mind, we had acquired this property almost half an acre, so I could build something that meets our needs. Next slide, please. So I began this process in late 2019 and have consulted the town planners before I actually even made the purchase decision. So far, I have worked with at least 3 formal rounds of reviews with the planning staff, 2 reviews with the consulting architect, and numerous feedbacks reviews with the neighbors. I had started the neighbor outreach sometime in 2020 and also had shared plans proactively with my neighbors. I've also worked hard to come to an agreement with my neighbor at 14298 Laura Drive. Next slide, please. So I've complied with all the asks that were made in the last council meeting, including height reductions, incorporating step backs, privacy, and screen trees. Next slide, please. So specifically on mass, a number of improvements have been made. The overall height has been reduced by almost 4 feet, with the foundation reduced by about 2 feet. Step back introduced of 4 feet and 7 feet on the left side, and a void reduction of about 30%. A setback has also been added to the rear, as well as a roof introduced to break the mass around the whole house. Next slide, please. We have had to redesign the second floor to meet some of the asks, and we moved the balcony away. As you will see, that the position of the house now is far apart from neighboring houses, so that we are not looking at each other's windows. Next slide, please. The last council meeting emphasized the need to focus on the immediate neighborhood of 2 houses to the side and houses across the road. Laura Drive is dominated by multi-family housing in the houses across the road, with the largest square feet of living space, lot area, and also has 2-story houses as well as single-story houses. The house next to me is also a beautiful house, which is comparable in size, especially in context of the lot size, with my house having a lower overall FAR. Next slide, please. The impact to the streetscape is minimal as my house is set 137 feet deep inside the lot. Next slide, please. The architecture style has also been altered to suit the recommendations from the previous council meeting to a less formal slide as attested by the consulting architect. Next slide, please. There exists houses in the immediate neighborhood which does have formal entry styles. You'll see my right neighbor as an example, and another house on the Laura Drive. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we have worked with the neighbor to address concerns and come to an agreement. So we have done all these points that were asked for. Next slide, please. We acknowledged, we had exchanged emails to confirm our understanding in April, and and this is the sort of agreement that we had reached. Next slide, please. We have also addressed the concerns of my neighbor at the back, Mr. Bulandi. Unfortunately, we have not been able to agree as his ask of put setback exactly like what you did for your left neighbor, I felt was unreasonable, and the conditions are between the two neighbors are different. Next slide, please. A number of steps have been taken to address the concerns of Mr. Bulandi. We have lowered the house. His house is now towering more than 7.5 feet over my property, which is quite high. The second floors are more than 128 feet apart, and the first floor is also 114 feet apart, more than double the stipulated setback requirements. Next slide, please. Additionally, screen trees will provide privacy, and both his first floor and second floor are now more than 5.5 feet higher than mine, which is the average height of an American male. Next slide, please. Here is a list of how the mass comparison works with my back neighbor at Mulberry Drive. So some of these improvements were made. Next slide, please. I have also explained to him that in at least 2 of the 3 dimensions, his house is larger than mine. Next slide, please. And Mulberry is almost 50% higher than my property in terms of FAR. So in context, my house is not as big as it is being made out to be. Next slide, please. So once the screen trees have been put in, very little of my house will be visible to Mr. Bulandi. Obviously, this is not a very good adaptation, but it was intended to show the idea. Next slide, please. Similarly, I have used the 6 feet of the fence to sort of draw what a screen tree of 12 feet would look like. We have actually proposed longer, taller screen trees.
That's time. That's time, Chair.
Thank you for your comments. Do any commissioners have questions for the applicant at this time? I don't see any hands raised. So we'll move on. We'll move on to public comments. Pardon me?
I had a question.
Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Barnett.
So there might be a typo in here, but the letter of the designer, which is Exhibit 13, states that the owner has made revisions to create a more formal home by simplifying the roof and building forms. But on page 17, it states that the 2-story formal Mediterranean has been changed to an informal Mediterranean style. I was wondering if you can reconcile those.
So I believe it is a typo, and his sort of summary is that it has been made a more informal style.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, I had one other question, if I might.
Yes, please go ahead.
Do you agree with the, do you agree that to keep the HVAC and external mechanical equipment on the right side near the utility service entrance? That was a request by your neighbor.
Yes, I did. I did sort of confirm that in an email with him as well, that that is what we will plan to do when we sort of fill in the building plans and etc. etc. But yes, we did agree.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions for the applicant? I don't see any hands raised. So at this time, we'll move to public comments. Members of the public may choose to state their name and address or speak anonymously. And please understand, however, that the meeting is being recorded for the public record. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak? Director Paulson.
Thank you, Chair. First speaker will be, I'll probably butcher some of these names, so I'll apologize in advance. We'll just Fahi.
Hi there. My name is Vahi Rezi, and I'm an architect. I've been practicing in the Bay Area for the 20 plus years, and I'm quite familiar with different jurisdictions. I was asked by the neighbors to have a look at this package, and one of the first issues I saw with it was that unlike what we see with most jurisdictions with the single family residential districts, as this one is, the ADU is now planned to be in front of the main house, whereas the state mandate asks that the ADU is an accessory or incidental to the main dwelling. And very clearly, Los Gatos guidelines say that an ADU is not allowed to be in front of the primary dwelling unit. So I just wanted to bring this up before you guys, continue the conversation, because to me, this rule has to do with not wanting the main house to be mistaken for for an ADU, and here we're clearly confusing anyone walking by this property. Which one is the main house, which one is the ADU. I think the owner has made a promise to convert the ADU, the main house, the existing house, into an ADU in the future. And based on this promise, he's being allowed to build a second house on the same property. To me, when I look at those 4 garage spaces, the driveway, and all the pavement in the middle, it's quite clear that the property is essentially split into 2, as if it was a multifamily lot. And it really does not look like the one house is accessory to the other. It's clearly looking like 2 houses to me. I understand there's no mention of this unique situation in the state mandate, nor in the Los Gatos zoning code. But I want to bring this question up to the commissioners if they think that this is, in fact, a fair arrangement for the neighbors. To me, a neighbor who purchased their house years ago, they assume they're living in moving into a single family residential neighborhood, and now they're faced with the property that's essentially functioning as a multifamily. And I don't think this is a precedent that we would want to be setting for future projects. The owner may choose never to touch this main house, and it's obviously in really bad shape. So really, we're not improving the streetscape.
That's time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Rezi. Do any of the commissioners have questions for the speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Thank you. Director Paulson, do we have any other speakers?
1 second. Let's see who will raise their hand next. Anyone else who wishes to speak on this item, please use the raise hand feature. Next speaker will be Human.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure. I think, Joel, I have a file that I'm presenting. Sally.
Yes, I don't think we received that, Jennifer. We didn't receive that file before 11. So we don't have that. That's not able to be presented.
Okay, so fine. I still have my 3 minutes, right?
Yes, and also you could note that his comments are attached to the staff report in the addendum. So he has a paper exhibit or an exhibit there that you could reference.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Home Bolendi, and I'm the owner of 14332 Marbury. The reason we are here is because of the fact that the way the design is being done. So if you really think about it, currently there is an existing house in the front that is being converted to an ADU. And the plan is to build the four-car garage, detached four-car garage, and a two-story tall house in the back. When we bought the house, we knew eventually somebody's going to build something there. However, what we thought, the house that they are going to build, it'll be in the front and perhaps an ADU in the back, but now is reverse. And this is unfortunately putting us in a very unique place where we're spending a lot of time in the backyard, and this property, this proposal is actually towering over our backyard. And there is a sitting area that is very close to the fence that essentially that distance is less than 58 feet. Now, the second thing is that, when you really look at the dimensions, the width of the house, the proposed house, it is wider than the width of the entire lot. The width of the structure is 57. Our entire lot is 56.6 feet. So, and also there are plenty of opportunities for house to move forward. There is a 17 feet gap between the house and the detached garage. Then also the detached garage itself is 40 feet long, and there is about 28 feet of space between the detached garage and converted ADU. So there is plenty of opportunity for a house to move forward. And by doing that, it will reduce the overall mass. So what we're asking for, really taking care of the privacy and overall mass and scale is the back, move the house forward, introduce setback and step back so that it basically, we can coexist and we still can be in a backyard and not have this beautiful house towering over us. And also there are some illustration, unfortunately, we don't have it, that you can see that height reduction really did some, but it really didn't do much because the overall mass is so big. So I'll stop at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Belandi. Do any commissioners have questions for the speaker? Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, sir. It's your position that you don't want screening trees at the rear of the subject property?
So our position, sir, is that there is a way to solve this by moving it back rather than what's the word I'm looking for? I'm putting up a huge wall of 18 feet as you saw. Now, do we like trees? Yes, we all love trees. But the fact of matter is that having this house, having it reverse, we invested a lot in this property, and all of a sudden sitting next to a multi-tenant type of this was a single family home area. Now all of a sudden it's being converted to something different. And who's there to say that the front house, the ADU, would be touched? And last but not least, what is the final product look like? What if we run out? There are too many uncertainties, too many questions out there. So to answer your question, sir, our position has been and always been reduce the mass and size and bulk. And by doing it, excuse me,
Mr. Belandi, the question was really specific to the issue of trees, and I believe you've provided an answer, Commissioner Barnett. Are you satisfied with the response?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Do any other commissioners have questions for this speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Dr. Paulson, do we have any other speakers?
We do. The next speaker will be Mike Martin.
Yes, I'm Mike Martin. I live at on Wedgwood Avenue, 17515 Wedgwood, which is right around the corner from the project. I rent, but I'm familiar with Los Gatos for many, many years. I guess the overall reaction is like Mr. Holman said, the size is overwhelming. Even reducing the height and stuff like that. I live in a single family, single story home. And there's a 2-story right next to us. Well, one house down. And the way that's done, it isn't overwhelming. It's I guess the facade, the front, the face of the proposed dwelling is what is so big. As I said, the size is overwhelming. Putting in those trees may help, but again, it's I guess for a personal perspective, there, the other, and that does cover, invade some of the privacy we have in a backyard. Not all that much, but it's nice to be able to sit down there, not having anybody from windows or balconies looking over us. Then the other thing is, parking is a consideration. Given the ADU and the spaces there and around within the property, it offers an opportunity for many cars there. I know it's a 4-car garage, but most of the experience I've had is that the parking it expands to fill any space and then spills out onto the street. And Laura Drive is already bumper to bumper parking, and I know that from personal experience because I walk along there every other night, and there's
That's time.
at 6 o'clock you can't even squeeze a car in.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. No, your time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do any commissioners have questions for the speaker? Commissioner Hanson.
Yes, I was just curious. Thank you for your comments. Have you spoken to the applicant about your concerns? Because he's been talking to quite a few of the neighbors, and I was wondering if you had raised your concerns with him.
I have not had the opportunity to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have questions? I don't see any hands raised. Mr. Paulson, are there other speakers tonight?
Thank you. We'll give it a couple seconds, see if anyone else would like to speak on this item from the public. Next speaker will be Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe Clark. I live at 14298 Laura Drive. I have a slide that can be displayed. I want to start by giving my appreciation to Charles and the town. Brought me to tears listening to it. So glad we had such a strong member in council. I want to start by stating that I've met a lot of people in our neighborhood over this last couple of weeks due to this project, and the overall concern that's just lingering with me is this house is still just massive. The second floor is 2,600 square feet of volume. The house doesn't look anything like any of the neighbors. The square footage got bigger from the last review to this review. And consistent with everyone, including Mike, I met him yesterday. He's asking for step backs. The point I want to make about the size is the second floor of this house will fit 95% of the neighboring houses inside the second floor, including Human's house. Human's house could fit on the second floor of this gentleman's house. So I understand the concept. And I think the real thing here is it just doesn't look right. It looks like a commercial building in a quaint Los Gatos town, in my perspective. And I think for solutions, like we asked for step backs, we got a lot. I'm appreciative, thank you. But we asked for 10 to 12 feet, we got 4. And I'm trying to be okay with it, but with a minor modification, he can have 0 impact on my property and our shade and give us everything that we need. And it would take 0 effort and 0 square footage from him. My ask specifically is look at the town. He's got a ½ acre. He can build 7,900 square feet on the first floor. I'm not saying make a single story house. I'm saying maybe only have 800 to 1,000 feet on the second floor and maximize your footprint and listen to the neighbors' concerns and fit in with the neighborhood and move in and let's have a barbecue. And I'm glad Mike, our gentleman next door to us, had the opportunity to get on the phone. Our senior members of the community are appreciated, and I'm glad he was able to work with technology. And thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Clark. Commissioner Henson, your hand is raised.
I forgot to take it down.
Okay, thank you. Do any commissioners have questions for Mr. Clark? I don't see any hands raised. Thank you very much. Are there any other speakers at this time?
There are. The next speaker is identified as 954047. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you yet.
Oh, is that me?
Yes.
Oh, hi, thank you. I'm Jeannie DeQuino and I'm at 14330 Mulberry Drive. And I do feel the home doesn't go in with the feel of the neighborhood. It's oversized for the, not for the property, but too tall for, it doesn't need to be so tall. I think that we need to take into consideration the neighbors' views, and it hides, it traps, like seeing the sunset from the neighbor's balcony. I think it doesn't need to be set so far back on the lot, and there are too many unknowns with that piece of property. What will happen with the front home someday? It doesn't. There are too many unknowns with it. It can be lower and go in with the neighborhood, and be a little bit more of a aesthetically pleasing home to go in with the town of Los Gatos, what the town typically would like. For just the aesthetic appeal to the street.
Is that all?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Do any commissioners have questions for the speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Director Paulson, are there any other speakers tonight on this item?
I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Hold on one second. Now, next, folks have decided to finally raise their hands. First will be Jim Rose.
Hello.
Hello.
My name's Jim Rose. I own 14307 Mulberry Drive. I'm behind the subject property and a little bit north of it. Just have two concerns. It doesn't affect my direct view or anything very much, but I do want to encourage the owner to consider the neighbor's privacy. And I want to encourage the commissioners to consider neighbors' privacy. This is a unique neighborhood, a bunch of houses in back sort of thing already. Looks like it's getting another one, but it's not a regular neighborhood, houses lined up that don't have the same issues. So it's a special neighborhood and needs, I think, should have special consideration for privacy. I think a lot of privacy concerns could be mitigated. I'm not going to get rid of everything, but could be mitigated by bigger setbacks. A wall of windows looking down on your yard is a lot worse than one or two windows looking down and farther back. So the other major concern is parking, and I'm sure you guys are aware of the Laura Drive parking issues. It's really bad, and it affects more than Mr. Schaub's property neighbors, and it's going to affect him as well. We can't put his trash cans out on the street. So I would like to encourage him to consider the parking at the ADU and the town to consider the parking at the ADU, because that affects multiple streets, Lower Drive, some of Mulberry, some of Wedgewood. It affects a lot of people for that parking issue. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Do any commissioners have questions for this speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Director Paulson, are there other speakers on this item?
There are. The next speaker will be Mark.
Good evening, everybody. This is Mark Kuiper. I live immediately across the street at 14301 Laura. And my wife and I and family have lived here for 10 years. And first of all, I have to say, I'm delighted to know that there's an improvement coming. I don't know if you remember the little flash of the yellow bungalow, but ever since we made the plan to move in here, there was a parallel plan from the previous owners to put another single family home in. So, living in this neighborhood, I have a working definition of what a single family home looks like. I have to say, honestly, I was really taken back when the image went up by the driveway. There's this sort of Mediterranean looking behemoth, and you look at the square footage, one looks at the plan, and you just have to ask, maybe I'm echoing, there's so many unknowns here, but you look at what's being designed and built and you say, well, okay, that's a definition of multi-generational, but what happens down road? The comment of a commercial building, shared housing or whatever, every suite's got its restroom, double kitchens, 4-car garage parking all over. It just, honestly, it just doesn't feel like it fits. We want to be good neighbors. My wife and I are reasonable people, but I have to concur, and I'd really ask you to seriously take a look at this thing, because once it's up, it's up. I look at it every day walking out the house, and one of the comment I have is, what is the elevation, the architectural plan for the ADU? Because today it's a French's mustard bottle sitting there, and with a dirt driveway and pickups parking in front. And I'm really hoping that the finished product is a complement to our neighborhood and fits in and feels good and is an asset to the value of our real estate, and not something you have to look at and make excuses for. So I think that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Kuiper. Do any commissioners have questions for this speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Do we have another speaker, Director Paulson?
Next speaker will be Jamie.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for listening to our concerns. My name is Jaime Munoz. I live at 14270 Laura Drive, 2 houses away from the proposed house being built. I've been here for 20 years, live in this neighborhood. I take pride of keeping my house clean and neat, and my concern, like with others, is the lack of parking on the street on Laura Drive. It's always out of control, as we all know about it. My concern with the house being built the way it's being proposed, that is, it's not in accordance to the block to our street houses that we have. It seems to be out of scale, too massive for the neighborhood. And my proposal is, since the lot is quite large, that the upstairs floor can be reduced more inwards, left and right, left side and right hand side, and more of the square footage can be built on the downstairs and provide privacy to the neighbors all around the house. And I welcome a house being built and that is going to increase the value of our neighborhood, but at the same time, I'm concerned about the parking ability on the street and also the ADU unit. My concern that it seems that, like Mark was saying, that there's cars parked on what it used to be a grass. Now there's trucks parked in the front, and it's making the neighborhood look like the ghetto. And we all pay a lot of taxes, as we all know, living in Los Gatos. And we want to keep our neighborhood clean and decent. And I welcome a beautiful house being built, but also keep in consideration to have a house reduced in size, especially the second floor, for privacy of the neighborhoods. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Do any commissioners have questions for this speaker? I don't see any hands raised. Dr. Paulson, do we have other speakers?
I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Let's give it a couple seconds. I don't see any more hands raised, Chair.
All right, at this time, the applicant has 3 minutes to add any further comments. Does the applicant wish to speak?
Oh, yes. So I would want to sort of, address a couple of points. So the height of the house has been reduced. And right now, even for Laura Drive, the height of the house is approximately 7 feet lower than the house just adjoining me between the Wedgwood Drive and Laura Drive, in the corner of Wedgwood Drive and Laura Drive. So, it's not the most tallest of the building here. 7 feet is a significant amount of height that you would see. Again, this lot is very large, and I do intend to keep the ADU, add to the housing stock of California. This is something that our state needs, and it is something that I think is a good addition to the house. Now, for parking, we have made allowances for a 4-car park garage, right? And there is also a large driveway, as someone mentioned, or you can see in the plans. So therefore, there should be adequate parking for residents within the property itself. In the sense of, sort of collaborating with the neighbors, I have tried to reach out to most people. I am kind of seeing a lot of feedback coming at the last moment, and I have not really, I really don't know what to do with this. I mean, there are people who are sort of looking at the sign, but they're not realizing that this house is set 137 feet inside. So therefore, they're sort of, the impact to the neighborhood is not going to be as drastic as it's being made out to be. And again, we are not discussing the ADU, but yes, when I'm spending all this money on the house, at some point in time, I am going to, make sure that the facade looks good as well from the streetscape perspective. So, I really appreciate the fact that, people have been talking about the house and they seem to be echoing the, same concerns. Although, my point would be that I have done everything that this council had asked me to do. And I had, spent a lot of time and money in redesigning the second floor of the house so that it provides privacy to, the neighbor on my left-hand side, as well as, including step backs and a roof between the first floor and the second floor to take care of the mass. So now I know that, people are not, it's a degree of satisfaction, I guess, at this point in time. At one point in time, I thought I had an agreement, but today I understand that, there is probably more that can be done. So yes, there is always more that can be done, but I'm really struggling with a boundary of, what is it that is being, allowed here. All my proposals are within the sort of, allowed limits and laws and ordinances governing this area. And honestly, I'm not sure what more is there that, one can do and what kind of guidelines there one should follow to sort of, satisfy. I mean, I could go out and ask everybody to design my house for me, but, that was not what I had started out with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. Do any commissioners have questions of the applicant? Commissioner Suzuki.
I wanted to hear about your perspective of the on the position of the prospective ADU. As one of the callers pointed out, the ADU cannot be positioned directly at the front of the property.
So before I started the process of purchasing this property, I did some research and I actually went down to meet with the town planners. The understanding was that given that it's an existing square footage, it is allowed to be converted into an ADU. Now it's a 1,200 square feet house, and to rebuild that house is at least not the $600,000-$700,000 in today's money. So, and it does add to the housing stock of this country. of the state, right? Which is something that we all need. So it was in accordance to all those rules that I came up with the current plan. And again, mind you, it has been more than a year that I've been sort of negotiating the plan and discussing what can be or cannot be done. And even during the planning stages, I've had feedback from the planners about how height, size, mass that I have incorporated. When I did the first round of architect consultant review, I got two choices. One said, change drastically or follow these 12 options that he proposed. I followed all of those. So again, to answer your question, it has been a long process with the ADU in mind, and the intent is to do up the ADU. This is something that I will take care of. However, the process is such that we cannot get onto that stage till the house has been completed. And this is a process that is mandated by the city itself, not by me.
Thank you for your response. Did that answer your question, Commissioner Suzuki?
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Hanson.
We might have talked about this in the last hearing, but I was trying to remember. It was suggested by more than one commenter that that you consider putting square footage underneath the home. And I just wanted to go back and revisit that because, looking at what you're trying to do for your family and everything, and I think you had commented that that it was not precedented in your neighborhood, but there are tons and tons of examples all throughout Los Gatos of people that have put underground square footage. So could you maybe comment again on why you wouldn't consider that?
Commissioner Hanson, what I had mentioned last time was that this was not something that we had considered because that was not, what we want for ourselves, of this house, and not so much as a precedence. What I was also sort of pointing out is that the house, by putting in an underground house, so the height of my proposed house is not that high, right? So that is what I was pointing out. So now then the question comes as to where is it that it sort of impedes someone else's enhancement or enjoyment of their environment, right? So you get to see the second floor of my house, right? So if I reduce that, there were privacy screens that were proposed that, why don't you use those privacy screens to mitigate the effect of what that view would be for someone, right? So for Mr. Bulandi, for example, who has a house which is 7.5 feet higher than mine, to complain about my house, I feel is slightly out of context.
So I think you answered my question. So you feel like you've addressed the neighbors' concerns and you don't need to go there for underground square footage because it's what you don't. It's not something that you want. So I think that answers my question.
Thank you. Vice Chair Birch.
One of the things that was brought up that would actually not probably mean any rework of the house was moving the house forward a bit, as there is quite a bit of distance between the front house garage and the garage to the new house. Have you considered that or looked into that as an option?
So two things, Commissioner Birch. One, I was not, despite all my outreach, this was not an option that was suggested to me during the process of communication. So I was a bit blindsided by a set of new asks this afternoon, with due respect to my neighbors. On the topic of actually moving the house forward, I'm open to that. Should the commission think that's that's a condition that would get me acceptance. However, I think what we need to keep in mind is the access to the fire engines. If there was some constraint there, so if that is something that I'm open to that, with the constraints being met.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for this applicant? I have one. I am a little bit surprised to see so many new voices come to speak out with objections to the project. My question to you is, when you did your neighborhood outreach, and some of these are neighbors directly across the street or in very close proximity, did you contact all of these individuals And did they have the opportunity to provide you input earlier?
So I did reach out to people who are defined as my immediate neighbors. So the two houses on the side and the houses in front. I did also reach out to the gentleman that he provided some comments. He's sort of, towards my side, I think, but not people on Mulberry Drive, for example, who are who are significantly away from me and have no real relationship with what, my house is. I think we also had discussions with the gentleman in front who had made, I think we had spoken about this prior to my last hearing here, and he was comfortable with what he saw. His questions were more about, am I doing anything to upgrade the ADU or not? So we've had that conversation. I have reached out to most of them. I think it's Mike who I had spoken to at one point in time, but I did not, I didn't hear anything back beyond that. And then the gentleman who's two houses away from my house, again, I didn't reach out to him because he was not defined as an immediate neighbor. You're on mute, I think.
Chair, you're on mute.
Sorry. Just to confirm then, you are testifying tonight that you did reach out to the immediate neighborhood as defined in the residential design guidelines.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions for this for the applicant? I don't see any hands raised. So if there are no further questions, then we will close the public portion of this hearing and ask if commissioners have any questions of staff, wish to comment on the application, or introduce a motion for consideration by the commission.
And Chair, before we do that, I just want to let Mr. Martin know the public hearing has been closed. There is not another opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Hanson.
I wanted to go back to some comments that were made about the ADU. First of all, when I asked earlier about whether or not, and clearly the applicant's intent is to go there and do this, but whether or not they had to do it, I did look in the terms and conditions, and it does say under condition 4 that the accessory dwelling unit permit will be obtained prior to the issuance of a building permit. So it is in the terms and conditions. But the question about the placement of the ADU, as I was thinking through, I drive past at least two homes where they have ADUs in front every single day. So I wanted to ask staff, is that something that it's grandfathered because is it not permitted to put it in front? And under what conditions are you allowed to have it in front?
So again, I'll start, and thank you for that. Yes, a new ADU that would be constructed as new square footage would not be allowed to be built per our regulations, is not allowed in front of the primary dwelling unit. A detached, and let me just clarify, for a detached ADU is not allowed to be constructed in front of a primary dwelling unit. But existing square footage is allowed to remain on the property and be converted to an ADU. And
so then if they, at whatever point if this gets approved and they want to go remodel the ADU, if they tear it down, is that considered a new home, or would they still be okay?
I'm sorry, if they tear down the ADU?
If it turned out that they, rather than remodeling the ADU, that they actually tore it down to make it, a new building that was better, would that cause an issue for them?
Yeah, again, I'll start, maybe the director can jump in as well, but they could, well, depends. If they don't create an ADU, then they could just theoretically, I guess, remove that. But at the same time, if they do create an ADU, then they have to remove a housing unit to demolish that.
Okay, all right. I think that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Thomas?
I just wanted to confirm that the same thing, that because the way that I am reading the town code is that that you can convert existing floor area, and that includes also rebuilding a new structure in the same location and manner. So is that like, I mean, driving by the structure, I don't know all of the details, but if they were to go in there and deem that like it was not safe to just remodel it and it needed to be started as new, that's, I think, what we're trying to confirm, that a new ADU, a new structure could be built in that same spot as an ADU if necessary.
Yes, I mean, that's true that it can be rebuilt in the same location and in the same manner.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Vice Chair Birch.
Yeah, maybe a couple clarifications from staff, just based on some of the comments that we heard from the neighbors. Maybe a little bit just more around what our role is and what we're looking at, just so people don't think we aren't listening to all the comments. So the first one is, again, there were some questions about the ADU and the aesthetics of the ADU currently. I wondered if staff could confirm that at this time, that's not the application in front of us. And while we do have in the conditions of approval, the statement about it being an ADU, and I do I appreciate Commissioner Thomas actually reading that section out. Thank you. But otherwise, we are not actually reviewing anything with the ADU. Is that correct?
And that's correct. The ADU is a ministerial permit, so it is not discretionary and is not before the commission this evening.
Perfect. And the second thing that did come up a couple times was also about the parking. And I wondered if you could clarify for us, as far as the application in front of us, the parking.
The parking before you is related to the construction of the new single-family house. The parking related to the ADU is not before you this evening. And again, conversion of floor area for an ADU doesn't require parking either.
Great.
And Chair Birch, before you go on, maybe just for a little bit of additional just general information for folks here, and so that they can understand kind of where we are in the town and in the state. You know, the state's passed a number of regulations relating to ADUs, removing any discretionary review. These do not get notice to the neighbors. They would never come before the Planning Commission. And technically, every single family house in town can have 3 units on the site. So you can have an ADU and you can have a junior ADU. So I know there was a lot of comments about multifamily neighborhoods and commercial structures. The state law, and the town is consistent with state law, can have 3 units on it. And so there are a lot of things that we previously regulated, 4 years and more back. Every year it seems to be that the state, as issues come up in different jurisdictions, there's always another bill to try to remedy those issues to make it easier to construct these units. So I just for the public's information that, technically right now, every single family property in town can have up to 3 units on it. And depending on location, I don't think this one would fit that location, but many locations in historic districts within a quarter or half mile, I can't recall, of a bus stop, they're not required to provide parking either. So, a lot of those opportunities for jurisdictions to regulate ADUs to address issues that are inherent with them, such as parking, have been stripped away, and we don't have any jurisdiction to review those.
Perfect. That was actually my very next question to ask, just because I did hear all the neighbors, and I don't want, as this conversation continues, for them to think we didn't hear them. There's just been a lot of changes with the state on what we can do. And then if it's all right with the chair, I actually did have one other question. I was going back through the drawings, and I may be missing something from the February meeting. So if I am, I apologize. It's from the way it looks, there is an elevation change from the application property and the property behind it. I'm not 100% clear on it, but if I remember properly, isn't the application property sitting lower in elevation than the rear neighbor? Yeah, it looked like it. I just want
It
to
is, that's correct.
Yes.
It is.
I
it
was
is.
going to look for the exhibit that there's I believe, a section that illustrates that.
Okay. Okay. That still helps. I thought that's what I saw, but I wanted to just make sure. I think that was it. Thank you.
And I think it's A16 in the revised development plans.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Hanson.
Oh, I was wanting to make a comment. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, when we continue items, and this is, for the benefit of kind of how we do things as a commission, we generally give the applicant advice and guidance on the things that they need to address before they return to us for another review. And so in this particular case, we had a couple of neighbors that had very vocal complaints and detailed complaints and PowerPoint presentations to go along with that. We gave the applicant direction to go back and do that. And I'm reading through everything that the applicant's done. I feel like the applicant's done an excellent job of trying to address the neighbors' concerns that they knew about. But then tonight we have about 5 more neighbors that come in and don't feel that the house fits in the neighborhood. And so I'm troubled by this in terms of, on the one hand, I feel like the applicant's done a really good job of meeting the requirements that we set forth for them. But on the other hand, we have now new complaints from the neighbors. And then coupling that with one of the requirements we asked for is a second review by the consulting architect, which came out very glowing and just fine. So I'm looking for feedback from other commissioners because I'm troubled by this. We certainly don't want to, put something in that's that contrary to the neighbor. But on the other hand, we didn't hear these additional issues before this evening. So I understand the frustration of the applicant. So I'll leave it with that.
Vice Chair Birch. Thank you for those comments, by the way, Commissioner Hanson. Before the Vice Chair speaks, I would just like to concur. We had a certain set of requests that went back to the applicant last time, and it was a fairly clear list with instructions to speak to particular neighbors. And what we received in our package, in the original package, was a pretty strong testimony from the neighbors the neighbor to the left, that most, if not all, of his concerns had been agreed to. There were quite a number of thank you. You've met my expectation in those notes, and so I'm a little surprised tonight to hear what we have. And with that, I'll ask Vice Chair Birch to please speak.
You were literally, though, saying most of the things I was actually just going to say. So I had gone back to my notes from February and had kind of gone through the notes that we had, and then along with the checklist, that was provided that you just referenced, along with the email that outlined the requests, and then yes, I agree. I think in my opinion, just as you said, we listened to the neighbors. We gave some rather, I think, some specific requests. And then I do appreciate that staff did have the town architect take another look at it just to kind of double check us. I think that the improvements have been good. I think there's a little bit of a misperception when you see a big sign in front of a property and what that's going to look like. And then kind of the reality when you have the depth of a property and then you actually layer on other structures. So I get that it can kind of have this, like, it's going to be this great big thing, but in all reality, when you walk up and down the street, there are some diverse sizes and types of structures. I think if in every meeting we get new comments and we just kind of continually chase those, and I think as we've all maybe experienced a few times in our time on the commission, it could just become kind of a moving target. So, I feel by us clarifying the ADU questions, parking questions that came up and kind of where we are as a commission on that, and then just going back through the last meeting, the requests, the comments from the neighbors, what's been addressed on top of Larry Cannon's comments. I actually feel like the applicant has pretty much checked every box, along with the fact that it quite simply does meet all of the residential guideline requirements from staff. So, I feel that with the changes, it's a better design, and I really just feel like the applicant has really bent over backwards and done a lot of changes.
Thank you for those comments. And before I call on Commissioner Suzuki, I'd just like Tavana, I would like to echo those comments as well, specifically in that the move from the more formal block would read as a more blocky architectural design to an informal design with more articulated roof lines and setbacks is really making an improvement. It's creating a much more relaxed structure in the neighborhood. It's a very eclectic neighborhood. It is not a particularly formal neighborhood in my reading, and that actually was one of the concerns I had from last time. So I'm welcoming the changes that I'm seeing before us tonight. Commissioner Suzuki, you had your hand raised, and then Commissioner Tavana.
So we have three options. We could reject the application, request a continuance, or approve. I don't, as Commissioner Bursch said, continually requesting continuances as we get public comment is probably not the most practical thing to do here. The applicant has spent a lot of personal resources and time making sure that they could meet our very specific requests. And I personally do not think that it would be, I personally don't think it would be good if we just rejected this application. Realistically, I think that the only option here is to approve.
Thank you for those comments. Commissioner Tavana.
Yeah, I'd like to say I think the applicant did a good job making the changes based on what we had discussed at the previous meeting. Particularly to the neighbors to the left. However, I don't think all the comments from the neighbor on Mulberry Drive, Mr. Belandi, were adequately addressed. Previously, after looking through my notes, he did talk about the height, but also moving the property forward slightly as well. So as Commissioner Bursch asked the applicant tonight, I do think it's not unreasonable, considering that the new house to the new garage is 17 feet, and then from the new garage to the future ADU is 28 feet, to kind of bring that in just a little bit to satisfy, the privacy concerns from the neighbor at the rear. I think that would be a reasonable ask this evening.
Thank you for those comments. Vice Chair Burge.
Well, so let me ask, this is the reason I didn't bring it up a second ago, Commissioner Tavana, is I got to thinking about the number of neighbors that were very worried about the size and the mass of it at the streetscape. So I was trying to decide on that trade-off. I very much appreciate that the applicant is willing to look at moving it forward. So I would be curious what the other commissioners do think about that particular item.
Director Paulson.
I would also just comment that as we move it forward, as I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Clark's house, that you start getting closer to his house. So that's it. This is where you kind of have to balance the testimony and the impacts and decide, what can be mitigated maybe in other ways other than moving it forward. So I just offer that one comment to make sure the commission's aware of that point.
Thank you, Director Paulson. That's exactly the concern I had. There's been quite a bit of work done to make sure that the privacy concerns of the neighbor to the left have been satisfied, a lot of work. And I would wonder if we are overly constraining this problem. You move it forward, some other neighbor is newly impacted, and that becomes a similarly never ending kind of an exercise. So I do appreciate, however, Commissioner Tabana, that the applicant is willing to look at that. I would just say that if it becomes too much of a shell game in order to keep all of the neighbors satisfied, that citing the house where it currently is acceptable to me. I don't know who was first, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Hanson. Commissioner Hanson?
I think it was probably Commissioner Thomas, but I'll just say really quickly, I completely concurred. I thought about moving the house around. I think it's going to create unintended consequences because anytime you move anything, pieces around, then you have to look at it relative to, we have in the general plan 360 architecture. How does it affect, what does it look from all sides and how does it feel from all sides? I just think it's going to add to the problem. And then I just wanted to add on to that while I clearly heard that the neighbor behind doesn't feel that the applicant has addressed concerns, after I read the detailed presentation that was provided by the architect and where they talked about the differences in height and all the things that kind of mitigate that and the setbacks, I think that and the applicant's willing to put in screening trees. I think that the applicant has done enough for the neighbor behind, even though they don't feel that way. I feel like they've done a lot. And so I'm not sure, other than making a dramatic increase in the size of the house, which isn't warranted, that we're going to be able to make those concerns go away.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Thomas.
I agree with Commissioner Hanson's comments that I don't know if, the concerns are going to be met, but I also found on page 62, there's like an aerial view with the current location of the house. And on page, did I say 62? On page 52 of exhibit 13. And I found that helpful looking at it when this just came up. And so I just wanted to share that with everyone because I do think that moving the structure forward, I think that looking at it from this perspective, it shows like a good distance from like all of the other structures in the neighborhood, like all the other houses. And I do think like moving it forward brings it closer to the neighbor on the left and even that like one on the Wedgwood Drive one on the corner. And so I'm just echoing some concerns that I don't know if it will just bring up other issues and other privacy concerns. I could be convinced either way, but I did find this visual helpful in trying to imagine things. I do have a question for staff or other commissioners about if we were to make a recommendation to move it, is the only option to do that with a continuance, or can we approve it with that as a, what are our options? Thank you, Director Paulson.
So you could direct a specific distance that it be moved forward to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Development, or you could request a continuance so that when that relocation happened, you would have, again, additional input from the neighbors who may be more or less impacted.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was asking because out of curiosity, not because that's the direction I believe we should go in.
Well, there are often the opportunity to add certain stipulations when there is an approval. So that it's a good question to ask. I'm not in favor at this time of asking for a specific move distance. I think we don't have enough information to make that call. And we don't, as has already been discussed, we don't fully understand what impacts that might have. And that's, foot by foot dependent. So I think that would be difficult for us. Commissioner Barnett, did I see your hand raised?
Yes, you did. I agree with what I believe is the majority of the comments by my fellow commissioners, and I'm prepared to make a motion.
Thank you for that. Please go ahead.
I move to approve the demolition of the subject garage and construction of a new single-family home at 14300 Laura Drive. That's APN 409-15-028. Architecture and site application S-20-019. Property owner is Amrito Shabi. All is described in the agenda item 3 of the staff report dated April 9, 2021. I can make the findings 1 through 6 as set forth on pages 12 to 13. The basis of the findings are the staff reports of February 24 and April 9, 2021, and exhibits 1 to 20 attached to those reports, as well as the evidence presented at the 2 hearings. My motion includes the conditions set forth in the staff report, including conditions 13 to 15, which were added for this hearing. I can make the finding that the proposed project is categorically exempt pursuant to the adopted guidelines for the implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act, Section 1503, new construction as conversion of small structures. I can make the finding as required by Section 29.10-0903E of the Town Code for demolition of existing structures. I can make the finding that the project complies with the objective standards of Chapter 29 of the Town Code. I can make the finding required by the town's residential design guidelines that the project complies with the residential guidelines. I can take into consideration, as required by Section 29-20.150 of the Town Code for granting approval of an architectural and site application, and approve architectural and site application S-20-019, subject to the revised conditions referred to previously. That's my motion.
Thank you for what I think personally is the most comprehensive motion I've heard yet on the Planning Commission. Vice Chair Birch.
I will second the motion and wondered if the maker of the motion would be agreeable to adding the note. There was a previous comment about the location for the exterior mechanical equipment, which the applicant did agree to. I don't remember which side, but I know it's earlier in the meeting. Would you be agreeable to just adding that to the conditions?
Yes, I'd add that condition, and thank you for the comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any discussion about the motion on the table? I don't see any hands raised, so we'll call the question. Commissioner Hanson.
Yes.
Commissioner Tavana.
Yes.
Commissioner Barnett.
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Commissioner Suzuki.
Yep.
Vice Chair Birch. I'm reading your
Yes.
lips and seeing
Yes.
yes. And I vote yes as well. And so the motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. All right, we now move on to other business.
Appeal
And-
rights, Chair, appeal
Chair.
rights.
Yes,
The appeal rights before we move on to the next item.
thank you.
So anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. Forms are available online. There is a fee for filing the appeal, and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
Thank you for that. Okay, we'll now move on to other business. We have 2 other business items, and so the first tonight is item 4, which is to discuss and provide input to the Town Council regarding the application for Planning Commission. And so what I would like to do is go through the application that we have in our packet and ask if there's any comments or changes or recommendations to the questions asked, or whether there is a suggestion of additional questions to be asked, or whether questions on the application might be removed. And so with the commission's agreement, then I want to move to page 4 of the commission, which is where the questions besides name, background, and education come from. Anybody have any comments or changes to recommend on asking why someone is interested in serving on the commission? Okay, shaking heads is fine. And if there's no comments, we'll just keep moving on. And if I'm going too quickly, please stop me. Next question is, have you ever attended a planning commission meeting? If yes, please provide a summary of your observation. If not, why not? Commissioner Hanson.
I think this is sort of like a loophole in the application. I think what we really want and expect is that anyone that applied could, especially since our meetings are on television and they're recorded, and you can watch the videos on YouTube, there's no reason that any applicant shouldn't have watched a meeting and have made some observations. So rather than asking the question about, have you ever attended a planning commission meeting, I think it should be, something along the lines of, can you tell us about a planning commission meeting that you've viewed or attended, and go through that versus a yes or no question.
Yeah, I had that same suggestion. And however it might be worded, the intent would be, please note on the application which commission meeting you viewed or attended. So we have an actual date reference if anybody was interested in going back. And then you can certainly ask for, and we would want to hear the observations that the prospective candidate had after viewing that meeting. Without any further guidance, I think just general, it could be about decorum, it could be about topics, it could be about anything, but let's hear what specifically they see. Commissioner Thomas.
Yes, and I would just add that adding a note that they're or the link to be able to view them online.
Good suggestion.
Yeah, that is a good
especially
idea.
since these are electronic forms, so that's a pretty easy thing to insert the link to the web page. Okay. Yeah. Any other comments about this question? All right, moving on to the next. How do you view the role of a planning commissioner? Any recommended changes?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was wondering if we could maybe reword this a little bit, because I think what we're trying to get at with people is the understanding that it is a, quasi-judicial body who, serves the discretion of the town council. But I know, like, the first time I filled this out, I had no idea, like, what do you mean? Am I answering that in the viewpoint of a resident? Or, so I wondered if it could maybe be worded a little bit differently, whether it be, quasi-judicial body who, I don't know. Maybe I'm not saying this exactly right. I mean, we've got a couple of people that just recently filled this out. Did you guys kind of have the same, like, well, from which viewpoint are you asking me? Rob's giving me a face, so maybe it's not the best way to ask that question.
Yeah, Commissioner Suzuki you have your hand raised, and then Commissioner Thomas.
I had a similar thought looking at this question. I guess that's what it was talking about. It was talking about what is the authority / influence of the planning commission as a whole. But looking at this question, the more that you stare at it, the more ways you can interpret the question. So I remember when filling out the application, I spent an inordinate amount of time staring at this question. So we might want to reword it somehow to make it include that maybe quasi-judicial element, or
the language that you just stated, Commissioner,
was really good.
Was good. So hopefully staff can take note of that. Commissioner Thomas.
I think that I understand now, looking at this multiple times too, how it can be interpreted in so many different ways. And I think maybe the view is maybe just changing that verb, or taking that verb out is, I don't know. I think that word viewing, how do you view the role? Like maybe just asking what is the role or
How
describe
would you define, or how would you describe?
how would you
Something like that.
yeah, exactly. I think the viewing is what is bringing up some of the confusion.
Yeah, I mean, the town council has seen many, many applications, and if they have a concern that the responses that are coming in are sort of all over the map, then they probably have some good feedback too about what they might rather see as wording for this question to steer the answers a little bit. Commissioner Hanson.
I remember during the recent round of interviews during which Commissioners Thomas and Suzuki were appointed, that there was a applicant that was asked a question by one of the town council members about is the planning commission a deciding or a recommending body? And the answer to the question, which was answered incorrectly, by the way, is that we're both. In our quasi-judicial role, we're a deciding body. And in the recommending role, when we talk about the general plan or things like that, then we're a recommending body, and we've already taken action on those in the last couple of months. I'm not sure how many applicants would have the knowledge of that or know where to find that out, even if they watched a planning commission meeting. So I struggle with this question because, when I answered it, I'd already been a commissioner for many, many years, and I knew a lot about the planning commission. But I'm not sure how anyone would know that or know how to answer it. So I wonder if it even makes sense to have that question. Maybe it would be a better question if there was a job description that someone could look at. Like when you apply for a job, you look at the job description, then you can talk about whether you need to meet the requirements of it. I just wonder if this question makes sense at all.
And just to follow on that comment, Commissioner Hanson, and this really dovetails with our next agenda item, but the town attorney, Mr. Schultz, has prepared an interesting overview. And there's a paragraph in there that talks about the role of the Planning Commission and its decision-making function. And the thought was that perhaps we pull that out or some similar wording and put it at the beginning of this application so that an applicant coming to it fresh can actually read, okay, it is what that role is. And so there's a little bit more information to work from. So that was just a thought that popped up after reading your Land Use 101 comments or paper. Commissioner Thomas.
I do kind of agree that maybe this question is not even necessary, because it kind of like, from putting my teaching hat on, it kind of seems like a trick question, because it's like, you're correct, like Commissioner Hanson, that if you really, should we exclude people because they don't know the exact role of planning commissioners? Should we be excluding them from being on the planning commission? Like, no, isn't the purpose we want diversity, and we want an inclusive, like, diverse array of people. So maybe this does, I mean, I don't know if I don't think necessarily that there needs to be maybe this question. And I mean, maybe it could be something different about like what you bring or how your experience can help you fulfill the role of the commission and of commissioners, as people have mentioned. But I do think that it kind of seems like a trick question now that I'm thinking about it.
Well, and if that's the council's aim, to offer a confusing question or something that can be interpreted in different ways, well, you're going to get those ranges of answers, and that may be okay. I did want to mention, though, that the two questions later, there is the question of your experience, and so we've got one of those already, and maybe we don't. I personally am comfortable with the question being in there. I liked the language that Commissioner Suzuki suggested, but if the town thinks that it's not, if the council doesn't think it's a particularly effective question, then, I don't think we'd have any problem with it going away. All right, so let's move on to the next. How will you balance your personal interests?
Chair.
Sorry?
Mr. Suzuki has his hand up.
Yes, Commissioner Suzuki.
Another thing, just as a general consideration for this application that doesn't have to do with any specific question. The application is supposed to signal competence and character, a person's ability to read about what the planning commission does and its regulations and land use, so on and so forth. Maybe one thing that we could do to make it more accessible for people to demonstrate this competence is not navigate through a website that's kind of confusing to a lot of people, and maybe directly add those links to the application itself. Like, for example, before you fill in this application, you might want to read these 3 to 5 links about what the planning commission does. And then we'll ask you maybe a couple of questions about it that could be part opinion, part recitation.
That's an interesting suggestion. It's sort of like defending your thesis in front of a panel, but that's all about preparation, and I think that's a reasonable request. Commissioner Barnett.
Yes, a slightly different approach would be to say, what is your role? What is your view of the respective roles of the Planning Commission and the Town Council in planning matters?
Yep. All good. Any other comments about this question? And Commissioner Barnett, just so you know, sometimes when you raise your hand, it's off the screen. So if you put it in front of your face, I'll see it for sure.
I'm having trouble with that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next question is, how will you balance your personal interests with the broader role of the commission? Vice Chair Birch.
I actually wondered if either Mr. Paulson or Mr. Schultz could kind of give us a little bit more, when you mean personal interests, what context, right? Like, is this a time, like, do you have the time to balance your personal, or is it like personal interest as in you're involved in these number of community groups that might have an influence or something like that?
Staff is on.
Nobody jump at once.
Well,
This is a question.
To further that, I actually was reading this you could read it in a simple, well, I like bicycling, but I don't think that's the kind of personal interest you're talking about. And to me, this really should be a question about bias and whether you can set aside a personal agenda in order to be a neutral participant on the Planning Commission. So, but if that's not what staff is thinking, let us know.
And this is the one question that I dislike probably out of all of them. I think the other ones could be reworded. And that's funny, you thought of it as bias, and I thought of it as, and he really needs a preamble to make sure the person understands the Planning Commission meets every other week and can take up to 20 hours of a person's time. And how will you balance your personal interest with the broader role of the commission? But it could also mean a bias issue.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Well, in that case, maybe we can offer a couple of suggestions, which is if the issue is how do you balance the time requirements, and that is a comment that's on the next page of the application.
Right.
You say there's
that was it. I thought it was kind of a duplicate.
But I personally think that having a question that says, can you set aside personal bias, and can you agree that you will set any personal agenda aside while you are an active commissioner? I think that's especially important. So if there's general agreement, I think that's a critical thing to add if we don't already mean that. Commissioner Hanson, and then Commissioner Thomas.
So I was thinking about, I think something like this came up in the Planning Commissioner Academy there, where they were talking about, it really is more about your personal bias versus your personal test. If we keep the question, the word needs to change. But example was given like that. There's somebody that is like adamant about architecture and only architecture, and maybe this thing had nothing to do with architecture, and so you're putting that into the hearing that doesn't need to be in the hearing. And there you could come up with any number of examples. So I think it needs to be something, that gets at that, where we're in this quasi judicial role, we're listening to evidence, and we can't bring all these things from, like what our neighbor did, or, blah, blah, blah. We have to look at the evidence at hand and only consider that versus all these things that might be in our mind from the past or experiences that we had. So if there was a way to rewrite that question to say that, I think that's what was the intent of it. And that's what we want to know is how people are going to be able to set aside that thing. Like when you become a judge, we're kind of like, not really judges, but we're in that kind of role. How do you make sure you're unbiased?
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas, and then Suzuki.
I just wanted to share that I interpreted it as the bias piece when I read through this initially. To be fair, again, putting my teacher hat on, I read through the entire thing before I started answering the questions. Maybe not everyone does that, but I do think that that we should change language if that's what we really mean. I did find this kind of an odd question. I was like, oh, they mean bias, I guess. And then I discussed how I balance my bias in like my job, and that's a part of my job experience, but also how a lot of my personal interests align with the general plan. So I don't know. I just wanted to share that to provide some perspective, but I'm interested to hear how Commissioner Suzuki interpreted the question.
Commissioner Suzuki.
I actually answered the question in two ways to ensure that I might get one of them right. The first way that I answered it was, I don't own any substantial amount of property in Los Gatos, so there is no conflicting interest here. Then after that sentence, I answered it with the biased way. And I think that there is one thing that we should be a little bit careful of when it comes to our language of setting aside bias. Like, how are you going to set aside bias? If there's anything that I've learned reading from psychology books, like for example, Thinking Fast and Slow, it's that humans are susceptible to all sorts of cognitive biases that we can't control. It's subconscious, whether they're personal beliefs or just heuristics. The question is, how do we deal with bias? Like, for example, maybe if like there's a study on judges in Israel who, when they don't eat lunch, they are far more prone to giving a severe guilty sentence compared to if they do eat lunch, right? Like something like this is something that they're clearly unconscious of. So I think that we should veer it towards, you have personal beliefs, everyone has personal beliefs. How do you balance that with serving on the Planning Commission?
So how do you create a sense of impartiality? Or how do you demonstrate impartiality?
Yes.
And openness to all of the issues? Vice Chair Birch?
Yes.
Yeah, and actually going back to a point, because it was something I also wondered about, and if it's not in this question, I'm not sure if it's a way to address it perhaps in a different way. The personal interest with property. We do obviously have people in town that own multiple properties and things. So that was another one of my ways that I thought this could have been interpreted. I do know that we fill out some other forms around those types of things, but aside from the aspect of bias and just, I didn't know if there was a need or anything to also address the fact that, this has nothing to do with whether or not you own multiple properties or have investment and things, but.
Okay, interesting point too. Commissioner Hanson.
I kind of liked what Commissioner Suzuki said. I think that maybe the term is, well, and also what you said, Chair Janoff, how do you demonstrate impartiality? And it is really about your personal beliefs, because bias is a loaded word. And it is true, everyone has biases, but the issue is kind of around, you are going to bring some personal beliefs into this thing, but you have to kind of look at the evidence. And so maybe if it was reworded to talk about demonstrating impartiality in your role as a commissioner, that would capture the thoughts.
Okay, good. Clearly this question needs to be revised. Okay, any other comments? And I'm assuming just like we do for Planning Commission or general plan, if something comes to mind and you feel passionately about providing that input, and we've closed the meeting, then please be sure to send a note off to staff and, let them take that into consideration as they forward. I mean, we're not specifically rewriting these. We're providing input so staff can recraft according to what we've said. So, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just giving the general guidance. Commissioner Suzuki.
Building off of what Commissioner Birch said, I think that we should consider having a question on what sort of material interests do you have in town. Yeah, it's good for the public, the town council, maybe the public to know.
Transparency is everything, right? Okay. All right, the next question is, what design or land use experience do you have that would be useful on the commission? Commissioner Tabana. You're on mute.
Sorry, can you guys hear me okay? My internet just said it was unstable. For this one, the only comment I had was get rid of design or land use. So what experience do you have that would be useful to the commission? Keep it simple, and then we can see the applicant's response. That's it.
All right, great. Any comments about keeping it simple?
Yeah, agreed.
Commissioner Thomas, and then Commissioner Hanson.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Get rid of it, because I think that the next question addresses it's kind of an overlap. The next question is, what is your philosophy of planning? So if people want to elaborate on their past experience, that I feel like it's relevant and will get covered in that question.
Commissioner Hanson.
I'm fine with taking out the design or land use, but I mean, I think the thing that makes the Planning Commission different than any other committee that you'd apply for is that it really is essential that you have some knowledge of land use. And if you came into the role without any of that, you'd have to work really, really hard to get up to speed on all that. But that being said, taking that out would make it probably people could put what they wanted, and it would probably be clear to the council what experience they bring to the table, or at least from their perspective.
That's your Birch.
I was just going to say, much like the one where we were saying the role of the planning commissioner, we were maybe talking about having like a clarifying statement before that. What if it just was, the planning commission is, land use body, something, and then just what experience do you have that would be useful? Maybe then it keeps it a little bit targeted without pigeonholing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Commissioner Suzuki.
I see three options. I see Commissioner Birch's proposal. I think that we could maybe have one where it says, if applicable, for having that sort of specific experience. I'm personally partial towards cleaving the language and then adding some sort of a preamble to say, well, we do emphasize this, but if there is any other like more informal experience that doesn't have to do explicitly with having a degree in urban planning or having a job in urban planning, you probably want to say it here.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of keeping this question in some form. It's really talking about applying critically your knowledge to the town concerns and how your experience can help contribute to the work of the Planning Commission. So I'm in favor of keeping it, and I like adding the preamble language to get to a more full answer. And if somebody says they don't have any experience in land use, but that could still be a compelling reason to bring someone onto the Planning Commission, depending upon other responses. And then so then the next question about how do you describe your philosophy of planning? Rob. Yes,
So-
Commissioner Suzuki or Commissioner Hanson or Director Paulson.
I was just going to say that, just for the good of the group and those who are speaking, I don't have this for a fact, but I would assume that these questions have been in there since at least all of you have been on this commission, and probably many commissions before that, without kind of any sort of vetting. So this is really kind of that opportunity to bring things more up to date and be more relevant. And given that, some of you, that all of you have been on the commission for varying lengths of time and went through the same process, that this is going to be a good exercise to get these comments, recraft some of these questions, and then get that input to the policy committee and or the council, depending on which path these go. But just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, and I just, this is one of those that says, if the council consistently thinks the answers to this particular question or that particular question are especially telling, they should keep it, regardless of what our comments might be. So just, they see the output. We're only looking for at blanks. Commissioner Hanson and then Commissioner Suzuki.
I think this question is too vague. I think that the thing that reason this is coming to us is to make sure that we're not making it a barrier for people to apply for different roles on committees and commissions. But this one is particularly vague. And the way I answered it, because I had already worked on the general plan update committee, as I talked about, starting with the general plan and all the guidelines and things that go along with it and everything like that. But I think it would be better to kind of write it like that, which is like, maybe a better question would be, what do you think are the key steps that should be taken to try and make a good land use decision? And then because philosophy of planning is such a vague term. What does it mean?
Right.
So I would advocate for trying to make it, and then they have to respond to the case study. So that's a practical application of how they would think through the problem. But I mean, if this was more specific about like how would you go about making a land use decision, I think that would get us better answers.
Vice Chair Birch, good comments.
My exact note by this was, what does this even mean? Right, because I agree, like it's not specific enough. You could probably, again, like a couple of the others, answer it 5 different ways. So yeah, either if council really felt like this is a very telling one, I agree with Commissioner Hanson in trying to like tighten something around it. But again, we go into this case study that probably actually vets that type of a thing out anyways. So I would more pose the question to, council or, staff of, if this isn't even relevant or kind of actually winds up being redundant based on the other questions.
All right. Thank you for that. Commissioner Thomas.
Just to bring up a few things. It's interesting because out of all of the questions, I think when I read this application, this was not a confusing one to me. I was like, oh, this is like your approach. Like, what approach would you bring to being on the commission, all of the decision-making, processing of information, and what you would take into account to do that. So I just want to bring that up, that's like, it's so interesting and fun to be in a room with a bunch of, in a Zoom room with a bunch of different people, because it's always so like helpful and great to hear about different perspectives. So that being said, I also think that if a lot of the other questions on the application are going to be much more specific, this one, maybe leaving it more general and vague or is good, because it allows people, it's kind of like that question that's like, is there anything else you want to share with me at the end of a survey? That's like, hey, is there anything else about planning or your approach or what you think about this and why you want to be here that you want to share? And if the town council feels like responses to this question, like give a little bit of a differentiation between people and what they're thinking, maybe it's worth keeping. I do understand how I totally appreciate that it's like, what does this even mean? Maybe we could change from philosophy to approach if we want to keep something very vague. still, or we could just add, is there anything else that's relevant that you would like to share? I do think that if we add that, if that was added, people will be like, I want to do this because X, Y, and Z, instead of actually sharing about their thinking and problem solving and collaboration abilities and process and skills. But that's just something that I wanted to bring up.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Hanson.
I actually think that's a great compromise. Change philosophy to approach, because philosophy to me is just a vague word. So if you said approach, that would nail it for me in terms of, you know, being clear.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Suzuki and then Commissioner Barnett.
This might be kind of a dissenting opinion, kind of building a little bit off of what Commissioner Thomas said, which is that I actually appreciated this question. It is vague enough to where you actually think about what a planning commission does fundamentally, what the duty of a commissioner is, how projects should be evaluated. How do you, I mean, personally, I answered this question in how do you balance long-term needs of the town versus the short-term desires and needs of the immediate neighbors, who are often going to be the ones who are going on these calls. That's the way that I answered this question, because it's so open-ended that you get to sort of probe the thoughts of the person on this application. Now, hearing all the critiques of this question, I could see that we do need to change it, but I do think that we should keep it somewhat open-ended.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Barnett?
I like Commissioner Thomas' idea of having an opportunity for other that you want to bring up. But on this philosophy one, it occurred to me that one approach or twist might be to ask what their vision for the future of Los Gatos is and how the Planning Commission can contribute to that.
That's interesting. I see nodding heads. That's have thumbs up. Okay. All right. Commissioner Tavana.
Yeah, just really quickly, the way I read this question a number of years ago was kind of like an opinion question. In your opinion, what is the role? What would be your role in the Planning Commission? Or how do you view your role of a planning commissioner, I should say? Which might, I think, clarify this question, because it is rather open-ended. I do agree with all the other commissioners on that.
So we're hearing both. It's too open-ended and it's good open-ended. So I think that's great feedback for staff. You can take that where you want to take it. All right, so let's move on to the case studies. Now, the case study that was on my first application was a residential application, very similar to the one that we heard this evening. And then my second application was this question. And it strikes me that we might have more than one case study, maybe fewer questions on the application if we don't want to get too bogged down in that, or the council wants shorter applications. But if we had multiple case studies, it really gets to different dimensions of how the planning of actual cases the Planning Commission would have to think about. And I think having more than one gives us the opportunity, applicants the opportunity to think critically in different dimensions, and also the town to see the difference in those kind of responses. Commissioner Hanson.
You know, I like your suggestion about maybe being able to choose between a couple different ones, but I have a couple comments on the one that's there. You're right. When I originally applied, it was a residential application, and if you kind of look at everything that the majority of things that have come to the commission just in the short time that we've had our two new commissioners, it's been primarily residential and issues with the neighbors and everything like that. Second of all, the suggestion that's made here has a traffic impact, and you know, with everything that's happened with state law and CEQA, now it's vehicle miles traveled, and you know, and it's a very slippery slope about whether or not we can, you know, we have traffic impact fees and stuff, but it's getting harder and harder to consider all that. So I wouldn't use that as the number one example to put in front of people. Instead, since I'm chairing the general plan update committee, I would propose putting something in there that is something that all planning commissioners are going to have to deal with in the next 5, 10, 20 years, which is state law is dictating that we put tons and tons of housing in. You have not in my backyard community, and how, and here's this proposal for housing and it meets all of the objective standards. How are you going to deal with that? I think that would be the ideal case study, because that's something that we're going to see over and over and over again.
Vice Chair Birch.
Yeah, completely agree with Commissioner Hanson. Yeah, I agree. Used to be residential. And I had questions on this too, about it kind of focusing on the whole traffic aspect. You know, we always get a traffic study. There is amazingly, there's never an impact. But, you know, our scope on that is becoming a little bit more narrow. I think maybe updating this a bit with what we see is going to be coming to the town. But on that same token, I do think there's also value in having more than one. You know, we've got the residential issue, but we do also have a very changing commercial world or retail or something. So I think having both on there, and again, maybe just fewer questions, but I think not only does it help, like they have to answer it and we can evaluate it, but I also think it gives applicants a pretty decent feel for like, this is the kind of thing you're going to see. And you may have 30 people sitting in chambers in matching t-shirts because they are very upset about something, or right. Like, and it's maybe a bit more of a realistic look at what we see. So it kind of would have that dual functionality between how they answer and for the applicant.
Right, thank you. And just to clarify my earlier comment, my intent wasn't to have pick one of these case studies to comment on. It was, please comment on both, because we want to see the thinking on both dimensions. Having said that, I like the idea of including something that's more forward-looking, because if you've got applicants who are very, very strongly not in my backyard, as Commissioner Hanson said, or no in whatever, are we ever going to allow a 3-story building to be built in Los Gatos? We don't care what the state has to say. Those could be telling responses for the town council in terms of the ability of someone to be to set aside their biases. Okay, we have Commissioner Suzuki and Commissioner Thomas next.
I just want to echo that I definitely agree that there should be an element of public dissent and also meeting the objective standards. There is a hint in the current case study that some of the neighbors are angry, but there's no question on this or how you should react to it. And I think that that should be an explicit component. What sort of considerations, general considerations would you take? Maybe even include a public comment in there, maybe. And another thing, this is a very basic one, but when I was filling out the application and I looked at the property location, my first instinct was to go onto Google Maps and search it up. And then I very quickly realized that this wasn't a real location. And when I got to the first question, what was your initial reaction to the above referenced project? I think that what my first sentence was, I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find it. So maybe you've prefaced this with, this is a hypothetical scenario, fictitious location. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Thomas.
I really want to echo that. And, but before I actually do, I want to say that I heard an acronym that was new to me that was like the ultimate NIMBY is a banana, who is a person that doesn't want you to build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know that we know those people. We know those people. We all do. Anyway. But I do think that I had a similar reaction to Commissioner Suzuki. Multiple people, when I reached out and said, I think I want to apply to the Planning Commission, and I talked to multiple people in town, a lot of people were like, oh, make sure you take time because there's a case study and there's this case study. And then I like get to the thing and I'm all excited because I'm a nerd and I like open it up and I do the case study and I like read. And then I'm like, wait, this is it? This is all I get to look at? Like, where is the traffic impact analysis? Why don't I get to read it? And so I do think that I was like looking for more. And then honestly, like I kind of felt like, I mean, how much can I write? I wrote a lot, let me tell you, I wrote a lot, but like, how much can I really write? This seemed like a pretty basic, straightforward thing. And it is dated, I think, because it's like, we're not making decisions based on traffic. Like that's just not a priority. And the state doesn't allow us to do those things anymore. And it seemed very straightforward. Like, okay, people, the traffic impact analysis said that that there isn't an impact. And then people are complaining, like, what can I say other than like reassuring the public, and then also like saying, can we add on some of these other things that will benefit everyone and make streets safer, etc. So I felt like I like as an applicant recently, I wanted something that was a little bit more dynamic, that it didn't seem like there was just like one good answer either, not to be like, we need to put a harder case study out there, but something that is a little bit more realistic. It maybe does have some documents and gives people the opportunity to like read some of those and refer back to an exhibit or two. Because the reality is that's what we do as our roles as planning commissioners. I do like the idea of having multiple. I too thought like, oh, pick one of the following. I do that a lot as a teacher. It usually gets you some like good responses. It's more fun and interesting and dynamic to read when you give people options. So I don't know from the town council's perspective if they might, when they get responses from multiple different ones, that it's just a perspective I wanted to bring up. But I do think that the two topics for case studies that people have mentioned, I support.
All right, thank you for that. Director Paulson.
And I just want to assure all the commissioners and whoever else is still listening, traffic is timeless. Whether it's LOS or VMT, it's going to be the same reaction, because the VMT is going to come back and say no impact, and everyone's going to have the same reaction. Right. So just, something to look forward to, that it's still going to be the same challenges, just with a different name.
Thank you for that. Heads up, Commissioner Hanson.
After hearing everyone talk, and I think that it was all great suggestions, I would agree that we should have a residential NIMBY thing, and then we should have a commercial one. And the commercial one, it's almost always going to be about traffic impacts. So, I mean, I think if you had both, it would bring some interesting comments. But I mean, I would also be okay with pick one, because I mean, you're going to get the insight that you need from one or the other. So,
Commissioner Suzuki.
There's one more comment I want to make, which is that we have to be wary about making this application too long, because I knew a few people who did apply to the Planning Commission, and we all spent a lot of time on this. And one of my concerns, and I'm not sure if it's a founded or reasonable concern, but maybe adding another case where you could have potentially very long answers that need a lot of deliberation might add a barrier to an additional barrier to entry for this.
Vice Chair Birch.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree. The Planning Commission takes time and study and deliberation. And if somebody was really interested and truly committed of like for more questions on case studies, shouldn't deter them. And I think if it did, probably the workload itself would be a big problem.
Yeah, I think
just my experience.
That's a really good point.
Okay.
Well, that was a robust discussion. I think we've given pretty good feedback to staff. Staff?
That's great. So we'll package this stuff up and move forward. But what I would say is, since we do have folks in the audience, we should see if anyone would like to speak on this item. So if anyone would like to speak on this topic, please use the raise hand feature. And I'm not seeing anyone, Chair, so I think we can move on to
Emily,
Mr. Gatos.
Commissioner Thomas, that wasn't an invitation for you. So yeah, let's move on. We've got a number of other items on the agenda yet. And so that brings us to, but having said that, if you've got comments, write them in. Staff will welcome hearing from you. Agenda item number 5, review and discuss the land use 101 paper provided by the town attorney. And also, did you want to talk about the code of conduct?
Yes.
Okay.
I will be talking about that also. I've been having a little bit of buffer problem myself tonight, so let me know if I start to fade in and out. I did provide you with a white paper. That's a paper I did a few years ago. And after I did it and sent it to you, I've kind of regrouped for today, because just listening to you guys, you don't need to know what the general plan is, the specific plan, variances, zoning. I think you know all of those things very well. And I'm just amazed at the level of discussion even tonight during the project. And Commissioner Barnett, thank you for those findings. That was quite done well. So I've got a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to touch on, we're really going to look at really that quasi-judicial role and in the findings that are necessary, because that's where we usually get in trouble. And that's where I start to, you'll see me sit up and really start paying attention when you're with your quasi-judicial role. So if you could turn to the next slide, we'll go through these fairly quickly. It's already 9:30. We put this on the agenda because we thought it was going to be a light one, so we can always do further follow-up. But the first slide there, basically, you already know this, the Planning Commission is 7 members, and you were prescribed by the town code and by the government code is how you get your duties and responsibilities. You're appointed by the town council, and you serve at their pleasure. We have in our code 4/5 vote can have you eliminated at any time. They can remove you from your seat if 4/5 vote. I don't believe that's ever happened here for the town of Los Gatos, but I've seen it in other towns. Next slide. So, what are your duties and roles that we talked about even in that application? You assist in the preparation and update of that general plan, which we're going through right now. There's a whole source of duties that you perform under the government code. You act as the advisory body for the town council. You review all of our development or most of our development applications. You are the primary decision-making body for many of the proposals in town. You hear the appeals for the DRC and the staff decisions. And it's really, you are the key venue for residences and the community stakeholders to learn about planning issues. I would bet there are more people that go to planning commission meetings through their lifetime because they have projects or they have neighbors that have projects, and they even do coming to council meetings. Next slide. So there's what we talk about all the time is whether you're wearing that hat, and the legislative hat versus the quasi-judicial hat. And when you're wearing your legislative hat, I will give you great discretion and great latitude to discuss many, many different items. And I'm not concerned because you're not involved with property rights. You're governing future property and what might be done there, but there's no specific property that you're discussing. And that's with your general plan or when you're doing zoning updates or when you're discussing policies, design guidelines, any of those things. Great latitude there as to what you can and can't do during your discussions. And we'll get in a little bit ahead of myself, but you really don't even have to make findings to make changes to those documents. Whereas when you're doing a quasi-judicial, that's when you're discussing a specific project, tonight's project, commercial projects, and that's when we'll usually end up in litigation if we don't do everything correctly. You also, though, we don't really talk about it, but you also actually do part of enforcements. If there's a conditional use permit that's being violated, that can come back to you for changes or for revocation. I think we've had a couple that were getting close to that, but none have come since my time. Next slide. So again, talking about that quasi-judicial, you've got to remain objective. You've got to determine and draw on the facts and reach conclusions, and you've got to really bridge that gap. You've got to base your decisions on policy and law, This isn't the time when we can begin to let our personal biases or be convinced from someone from the public when it's not based on policy and law. You know, and so we have to make certain that all our decisions are going to be able to stand up in court, because that's where the final decision is going to be made if we haven't crossed all our T's and dotted our I's. Next slide. How do you go about making this decision? Well, you know, you always consider the staff analysis, but you don't have to always. There's nothing wrong even with judicial, quasi-judicial hearings if you don't agree with staff. That's our best interpretation of our codes. And so, but you do consider that. And, you know, you also consider all of our goals, policies, zoning, and then you also, you'll get your community input. You know, you'll make your recommendations, decisions based on findings of fact. And you've got to apply, again, and I'm going to say this over and over, you got to apply your general policies to specific situations. You have to make certain that we go through each one, making our recommendations based on the general plan, the zoning ordinance and development agreements. This isn't the time when we can, you know, say we don't like the project because we think he's going to make too much money off of it. And it becomes, you know, we do have great discretion while we're wearing our judicial hat because of our design guidelines for single family homes. And so again, I will give you great latitude there because we have tremendous amount of subjective standards that we can base our determination either for or against the project. We also have some latitude with regards to commercial projects, but again, even our commercial projects have to be based on our policies, ordinances. They can't be based on the fact, like I said, that, you know, the developer is going to make a ton more money because he's doing it this way and not that way, or, you know, he's trying to eliminate parking. Even though he meets the parking regulations, he's trying to eliminate it just to increase his financial situation. Those are not legitimate reasons under our code. Next slide. So findings, they just explain how the town processed the evidence, you know, just like a judge does. You know, when a judge has a court hearing at the end, you have jury instructions that really show you, okay, here's what all the facts were. Here's what all the evidence was. Now I have to do a judgment. And that's kind of what you're doing. You're the jury, you're the judge. And now you have to, you can't just say guilty. You just can't say not guilty like a judge can. He has to explain how he reached that decision. And if we don't do that, that's when we'll get ourselves in trouble. Next slide. So, you know, for the purpose of your findings, you know, it's a framework for the decision that you've made. It basically, what it does is it enhances the integrity of the administrative process too. You know, just tonight, you know, just Commissioner Barnett reading out those findings, although they might take a little bit longer, they really do enhance the integrity. It really shows that there was a lot of thought put in it, as opposed to I've seen in other jurisdictions where they'll just say, yeah, motion to approve based on the staff report and what I heard tonight. And that's not going to get you there if someone was to file a lawsuit over that, because you haven't provided that framework for the decision that you've just made. And if you do that, you'll know that you haven't made that leap from, you know, point A to Z. You followed through and dotted all your I's again. You know, you have to make certain that, you know, when you do this, the judge is going to look at it. In that Topanga case, in the last one, you know, if you don't have written findings, if they're not, he can't find them and know exactly they're on the record as to how you made that finding. They're going to throw it out and make you go back and redo it again. So it's important for us to always know what our purpose of the findings is, that we're doing this in order to protect ourselves from judicial review. It's to enhance the integrity of the process with the public so they know, and it just gives us the ability to be able to, you know that we're careful and we reasoned and we were equitable with our decision process. Next slide. So when are they necessary? I think I've already touched on this. You know, you really don't need them in legislative actions. You know, it's the non-legislative, the adjudicatory role that you play. Those are when we're going to need them. for approving and denying all your projects, your CUPs require them. So you're almost always going to have them for most of your decisions, but there's a few times when they're not necessary. And you also, though, if anytime we're going to impose, conditions or fees, that's also necessary. Next slide. The form of the findings, they must be in writing. Again, you'll hear me use the word bridge the gap because that's what was used in all the cases that have come forward, between the evidence and the ultimate decision. How did you take that evidence? How did you take those facts and roll them into your decision? Conclusionary findings just aren't going to make it. And that's that conclusionary finding. I based my decision on the staff report and the evidence without explaining exactly what it was. Just an example is try to maybe when you can use the word because the proposed project subject to the use permit is consistent with the general plan because of, and state which general plan rules there are, or you state what's in our staff report. I think staff does an excellent job of kind of giving you the findings that provide you with that ability to recite those when you're in your meetings. And you always got to tie those findings back again to the plan, standards, and codes. That's where only time you'll see me jump in is if I feel that, your findings just are not based on the plans and the standards and codes. That's where I feel like, we're going to have a trouble. I'll give an example of, the North 40 project. Joel and I spent hours on the findings for that. And we brought them back to council. And when we got sued on those, I still feel proud of the fact that the judge said our findings, the facts linked up to the evidence, we bridged that gap. We did everything we were supposed to do, but they were based on subjective standards, goals, codes, as opposed to objective standards. But at least we had done that analytical process that we must go through so that our court case would hold up. It just would not hold up because of the Affordable Housing Act. And that was just a separate issue that we couldn't do anything about, but at least we had done the facts to the evidence in that case. Next slide. So just that was basically all I want to touch this and harp on you is just to make certain that, we pay real good attention to your findings. If you don't feel a commissioner who's made the motion, you're certain to chime in other ones, but we have to make those findings. We have to make certain that, our discussion about the evidence and the facts is based on our policies, codes, and standards and not about just our personal beliefs about a certain project. And so that's always important. And then just a few other ones I want to remember, the code of conduct, it's been tough for a few of you. You haven't even been in the dais and in the chambers yet. And we've been on Zoom now for over a year. It's difficult being on Zoom because we do get less formal and we have to remind, I've been going around to all the other commissions also about just making certain that we are still in a meeting. You're still, as I see it, you're the judge, the jury, and I try to treat the dais in the chambers just like the courtroom. And so it's important that we do conduct ourselves formally. The commissioners, we're supposed to refer to each other as the chair, the vice chair, and not with individual names. And like I said, I've been guilty of it also when we're in Zoom because it's difficult, but try to remind ourselves that. And when we get back in chambers, that will be excellent. And these code of conduct stuff, these are directly out of the code of conduct that was supplied for you today, the council's code of conduct, and then the planning commission's policies and procedures. So always practice civility and decorum when you're discussing it, just remain open. I'm not going to read all of these, but they're good reminders of us at all times. What's not in the code of conduct that I'm really concerned about is making certain, and you guys did great tonight, keep your cameras on. There's some chatter in the Brown Act committees that for those that don't have their cameras on, they shouldn't be counted as the majority now because they might not be there. And so, I've been trying to harp on all of our commissions to make certain you do. I know there might be a second it goes off, or you might, buffering seems to be happening more now, but try to keep that camera on as much as possible, just as if we were in the dais. If you need a break, you ask the chair for a 5 or 10 minute bathroom break if you need that. So we should be trying to do just as much. Next one. I think there's just one more slide for you. Yeah, just always remember to honor the role of the chair. And again, this is both in your code of conduct and the council's. You can object to the chair's actions, but they should be voiced politely and with reasons. Just listening today about Charles and I had some heated discussions outside the chamber, but when we were in, we always respected each other. We were cordial to each other. And he was an excellent commission as tying, all the evidence and facts together and understanding that role of civility. Because if that breaks down, I can tell you, I've been doing this so long, I can tell you, for 33 years of the council member that would swing it, when one council member would talk, he'd swing his chair around and put his paper up like he was reading the paper. And when you start to break down on that civility, you won't be able to solve any of the problems that come up. You'll have a breakdown in communications, and you won't be able to get the town's business done. So it's important that we remember to treat not only each other, but to treat the public with respect, regardless of what they say and do. We sometimes have to have the tough skin and turn the other cheek. You got to base your decisions. This goes back even from our code of conduct back into what really I've been harping on is, you got to make your decision based on the evidence, the arguments, the testimony, and the decision objectively on the merits, and wait till everything's in. It's very important that sometimes when I get a little worried is we need to make certain that if you have questions, after the staff report, they are questions. It's not the time for your opinion yet. Because then you could be susceptible. You could have an applicant that said, they violated my due process rights. They were biased. They'd already made up their decision before I was even able to speak. So your questions should be just that, questions. You should withhold all opinions and deliberations until after the close of the public comment period. And then that's the time to do your deliberation and make your decision. And I don't need to tell you guys this, but be prepared and knowledgeable is another one. And like I said, these are exact words out of our code of conduct. This isn't something I'm making up, but be informed about the issues on the agenda. And with that, any questions? I know this was probably a little bit of a review for all of you, but it's always good to look back at it again, to make certain if a good case study, was last fall when we had the parking lot structure, with North 40. And that was one that, it met all of our objective standards and our subjective standards. It was unfortunate they were trying to remove that garage, but it truly did meet all of our objective standards, but it had quite a few people that were bringing up issues at the Planning Commission that just simply were not within your purview, because we always have to go back to hanging our hat. I would say this to anyone when you feel like you're going to deny a project or approve it, you have to hang your hat on our code, our general plan, our zoning. You have to find something within that for your approval or denial of a project, as opposed to personal considerations. So that's my little, kind of did it fairly quickly. I think it was 20 minutes. So thank you for listening.
A good refresher for the more seasoned commissioners, and a good material for our newer members. So I think those are always good points to come back to. And if this isn't part of the commissioner's handbook, then it would be a helpful thing to include, I think. Okay. I think that closes other business unless any of the commissioners have questions. Okay, I don't see any. So now we'll move on to the report from the Director of Community Development, Director Paulson.
Thank you, Chair. And we still do have one person in the audience, so I'm just going to ask if Mr. Martin would like to speak on this item that we're discussing, which was the paper provided by the town attorney. And not seeing a hand raised, then we'll move on to the report from Community Development Director. So last week council meeting, there wasn't anything specific to Planning Commission actions that was done. At the next hearing next Tuesday, they will be looking at a couple zone changes which were reviewed by the Planning Commission. So I'll report out on those when those come back. We're moving forward with the, we just had a kickoff meeting today with staff and our consultants to develop objective standards. And so we're getting started on that. We're also, hopefully before the end of this week, we'll be releasing a request for proposals for our housing element. So those of you on the General Plan Update Advisory Committee, there is no rest for the wicked. So we will probably have a similar body for the housing element, which hopefully we'll be able to get you a few weeks break before we kick that body off. But that will be an effort that will be important. And the General Plan Update Advisory Committee has done a great job so far, and we're fairly close to the end of that process, but that ultimately will come before the Planning Commission, and that who will make a recommendation to the town council. So I think that about covers it from my end. You know, I'll just offer that, you know, I obviously got to work with Charles the entire time he was here. He was a great commissioner, a great person. We didn't always agree on things either, as Mr. Schultz said, but ultimately just a splendid human being, always very respectful of staff in meetings and outside of meetings, and always cared. And so real great loss across the board, not just for the town and commissioners and the folks that knew him, but also for the staff as well who knew him. So very, very sad news. So on that, that concludes my report.
Thank you for that. All right, and then finally, we move on to our subcommittee reports. Let's start with general plan, because I know that met.
Yes, since our last planning commission meeting, we the general plan update advisory committee met and discussed the racial, social, and environmental justice element, which is new to the general plan. It has, and is actually, we found out from our consultants, something that only a handful of jurisdictions in the entire state have decided to introduce. And we got some great comments from the public. And we also reviewed the introduction, which contains the vision and guiding principles, and found that actually, since we had voted on the vision and guiding principles, and they were approved by Planning Commission and Town Council 2 years ago, that there were a few tweaks that we wanted to recommend, which we did. And so tomorrow we're going to have one of our last two meetings. We'll be reviewing the revised drafts of the land use and community design element. And then we have one final meeting in May, on May 6th, which we'll be reviewing the entire draft of the general plan and hopefully recommending it for approval to come to the Planning Commission and then the Town Council. And there's some urgency. I think Director Paulson alluded to this. You know, we have a hard deadline with the state to certify our housing element, which we haven't started on yet. And so it, based on having sat on the board before, it did take a while. You know, we worked on it for probably a year and a half to get to the final result before it went to HCD. So we really do have to get on it fairly quickly because our current housing element is 2015 to 2023. So anyways, so it's been a good, great experience, and we have a wonderful GPAC who have been giving great input all of through the process. So I hope that it'll look like as good a result as it does to us when you see it coming up soon.
And through the chair, just a note on that meeting tomorrow night. It's a special meeting, so we are starting at 6. We typically start at 7. So just for folks who are following that, if you're interested in participating, it will be starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow night rather than 7.
Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. Any other subcommittee reports tonight? Historic Preservation or CDAC? All right, well, thank you very much for tonight's participation. It was a good meeting, a good discussion, good information, and a very beautiful reflection on Charles Erickson. So With that, I want to thank you, and this meeting is adjourned.